The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai, hoki mai, kia The Fold, e mihine, ko Duncan Grieve, tōku ingoa. My guests today are Melanie Spencer and Wendy Thompson from Thompson Spencer, which is, on one level, a almost brand new agency, and on another one that's got roots that go back older than the Spin-Off, go back to 2010. So basically, this is the new part of it is the name and the fact that they have, out of the sort of the birth of the Socialites, which was the original agency, gone on to acquire 5 or 6 others that have taken that original proposition of what was an influencer agency, like right at the very dawn of social as an advertising medium in New Zealand, to sort of round out the different parts of the business, whether that's media buying. They've got Flying Tiger, which uses WeChat to sort of speak to Chinese audiences. They've got People of Influence, which is almost more like a talent agency, and various other elements too. But I guess the general thesis and what makes them interesting, why I wanted to have them on, is that for a lot of the advertising industry, this thing that fuels the New Zealand media, fuels the creator economy, it's the engine underneath us. That's why I'm doing this, is that social has tended to be an afterthought and something that you sort of packaged up a bit of at the end of a campaign. That isn't always true and is less and less true, but it's still fundamentally a lot of the traditional advertising media comes from a creative idea that the most logical execution of is still a television commercial. There's a complete upending of that with Thompson Spencer, in that they will start with a whole bunch of social executions, influencer executions, and the ones that really bite, that really connect with their community, then they'll move those up into traditional media spots on billboards or television commercials. And I think that fundamental upending of the traditional or the conventional approach to advertising is what makes them quite challenging. This is an agency run by, owned by 2 women. That's still very unconventional in this business. We talk about that. But mainly this is really dwelling on the influencer economy, which is something I'm really interested in. Is very challenging to us in the traditional media, and because it is ultimately, it's a little bit additive, it's also a little bit substitutive. Like, people will switch from, being TV viewers, Netflix viewers, to being YouTube viewers, TikTok viewers, and that is the fuel that drives the continued growth in both raw numbers and in market share of the influencer economy. And Thompson Spencer are one way to look at that. So here is Melanie Spencer and Wendy Thompson on The Fold. Kia ora kōrua, and welcome to The Fold.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Start by telling me about Thompson Spencer and this sort of at once long established but also very new agency, and what's the sort of proposition around it?
Well, apparently I get to go first. I'm doing the nod. Yeah. So my name's Wendy, and I'm the original founder of Socialites back in 2010. My background is advertising agencies, which was really fun, and Mel came along in 2019 and joined our group, and we became the Socialites group, and we started adding different, I suppose, extensions to what we did in terms of social media. And we kind of got to this year and we were like, We've actually got like 6 different companies under the Socialites group, and they're not all to do with social media. So we really need to have a think about a rebrand, which was fun. And luckily for Mel and I, we both got quite good last names. We didn't go with our first husband's last names, which would not have been as pretty. But so Thompson Spencer came to be, which is just a lot clearer for everybody involved.
I wonder if you could sort of start by, you mentioned the sort of relatively rapid pace of acquisitions which have put the thing together. And rather than sort of it being a kind of more traditional agency that bolts on social media, you come from a social space and have bolted on some more traditional elements. What's the sort of thinking there to sort of add some more conventional elements to the still relatively new sort of realm of social?
Well, about 3 years ago, we were sitting around a table and doing a bit of a strategy session, and Wendy and I were like, just imagine a world where advertising was social first, and then assets were created for social, and then went out to traditional mediums. And that just started happening. It really started happening, and clients were coming to us and going, hey, we want to do this social media campaign, but those assets are awesome. We want to put them in out of home, or we want to put them across TV. So it just completely made sense that we bolted on these other business units that specialised in traditional. But everything that we do, community is at the core of everything that we do, or the heart of everything we do. And I would say that social media is still the beating heart of the agency, but everything wraps around the campaigns and the creativity that we do for our clients.
That is quite a profound difference, right? Because you very frequently see that film, meaning like a version of a TVC, is often at the core of big campaigns running out of the more sort of established agencies, and it can feel like they don't really fit when they're put into social environments, that they sort of sit there, but they just don't, it doesn't seem like native to the form, or like it has a resemblance to the content that wraps around it. Do you sort of see that dissonance? Is that what's sort of driving it?
100%. And I think clever marketers know that. Clever marketers know that matching luggage just does not work on social, and that's why it's starting to go social first, because the amazing assets that are created for social can roll out beautifully to traditional platforms.
And the cool thing about social is you immediately get feedback. So you might have spent millions of dollars making a 30-second TV ad. You don't really know if it works or not. Whereas you put something out in social and you'll be told very quickly by your community whether or not it works. And the great thing is you can do 10 or so different variations, work out which one works the best, and then roll it across your different channels and media marketing mix. It's just a lot smarter.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like it's a inverse way of putting it. Is there any danger of the kind of the reverse of what you're describing happening when you put them into those other environments, where something that works really well in a social context, once it's put on a on a TVC or on a billboard, sort of starts to kind of be deprived of the context that makes it explicable?
There is always a risk, but as Wendy said, you've kind of trialled it with your community. And your community, if you've got a community of raving fans, which you should do if you've got a powerful brand on social, then they will let you know. So it's already been tested.
What is your relationship to more traditional media? Do you still see the value in the kind of legacy or non-UGC platforms? And how do you sort of decide how to kind of add that to that media mix beyond the sort of core social environments?
I 100% think that there is still a place for traditional, and it's just important to know where your audiences are, and how to connect with them on traditional or digital. Your audience is everywhere, and your audience wants to see your content, if it is engaging, everywhere as well. So there is absolutely still a place for traditional, but social just elevates it. And you've got to remember that traditional is that one-way broadcast, so that's where you get that huge reach, which is important for brands. But social media is where you get that two-way connectivity with your audience. So you're really connecting with your audience on social on a human level, but that traditional is where you get that big reach, which is also really important.
And I would add that people a lot smarter than me in the media team get to actually carve up the budgets. That's what they do. It's what they're really good at. And they've got some really interesting strategies around it. And I'd like to say it's not my thing.
Fair enough. So, let's talk about that kind of acquisition spree that you've been on over the past few years. What has driven that? And, do you feel like the shape of the agency, built out and around that core proposition is complete, or are there other areas that you could describe that might sort of give you an even more rounded out proposition?
Yeah, we're still looking for other things, or like we always got our eyes and ears out. I feel we've got the core. Like the core is there, so now it's just adding on little bits and pieces, really. And I think we've mentioned as well, we're also looking in Australia just to see what we can find there.
How do you find, if social is the core, and often that does tend to be driven by an influencer, that how do you sort of, because you do have quite a number of international clients, how do you take a community that might have a strong geographical bias towards New Zealand and then kind of connect that up to an international brand, or is it marketing that brand to a New Zealand audience? How does that all work?
Sort of depends on who we're marketing to. So our international brands, we are normally, it's Asia Pacific where we tend to do some really great work, but then we're also working with New Zealand brands in, say, the States, for example. So in the States, we're working with American influencers who've got large American populations. So it's horses for courses, really. It's just, as Mel said, it's just going back to where is the community and then connecting with them where they want to be connected with. So, yeah, we work with influencers all around the world as well.
So let's talk about that sort of, you kind of hear the term creator economy and influencer marketing and a few different things. How do you like to refer to it, and how would you characterise the relative maturity of that space as of now?
Oh, Mel, you're probably closer. I've got thoughts, but I'll let you go.
Look, it's still got a ways to go in New Zealand, for sure. And the funny thing is, it's always been around. When you think of Dan Carter and his Bonds underwear, and I used to look after high-profile chefs back in the day, 20 years ago, and that was before influencers were even influencers. When we acquired the Social Club, which was in 2020, we were still having to talk brands into using influencers. Now, only 3 years later, they're using influencers as an always-on drumbeat because they know that they can leverage, their content and their content creation, but also their communities. So it is becoming stronger and stronger in New Zealand. But there is still a ways to go here in New Zealand in really leveraging influencers and their content and also their communities.
I'm seeing it in an interesting space as well in the B2B market as well. It's quite cool. We've started doing quite a bit of work, like say I'm thinking about Microsoft, for example, working with, trying to sell, software, Microsoft products at a very high, procurement level, and working with, tech entrepreneurs and very sort of more of a B2B level. It's really interesting. It's not just for selling Bend-On undies, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you can look at influencers as ambassadors, specialists in their areas. So for B2B clients, it works really, really well. So there are different levels, and for different types of brands, B2B and B2C, it works really, really well.
There has been, there was a long period in which a more traditional kind of journalistic media covered technology with a very kind of optimistic view of it, kind of uncritically, and then that swung around almost potentially to an excessive level over the past few years. You think about the sort of Frances Horgan Instagram papers that the Wall Street Journal covered, and it's just one of any number of, like, it's basically a large daily beat for a lot of US publications now. Which broadly speaks to a kind of a general level of misgivings around the social platforms and particularly their impact on certain communities. How do you sort of mitigate some of those risks for brands that you're working with, or what is your response if those situations are raised with clients by clients? Sorry.
Firstly, that's why you use an agency, because agencies, it's on us to make sure that we vet those influencers and vet them really, really well, and mitigate those risks. So when we propose an influencer, or before we engage an influencer, we're doing deep research on them. First we make sure that they're right for the brand, but also that the brief and the contracting is watertight to protect not only the brand but us, and also the influencer as well. So you get to know the people that could possibly put a brand at risk, and you do your research. We're not about using influencers for influencers' sake. It is about using them for their content creation, their communication, and leveraging their communities as well. So we see it as using them for good, but not for influencer sake.
You talk about leveraging their communities, and as there was a period of time while this was all kind of being established that there was, that it wasn't kind of quite clear what the transaction was. Have you found that as it has matured, that the sort of relationship between a brand, an influencer, and their community, like that it's operating smoothly, or do you sometimes find that there is a tension between an audience that might have found and followed an influencer for one thing and then is finding that they're ultimately being packaged and sold in another?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, an influencer will never do anything that will put their community at risk. So it's almost a bit of a fallacy for that to happen. I've never actually, it's talked about a lot in the media, but I've literally never actually heard of it happening, because at the end of the day, an influencer's most valuable asset is their community. So they don't want to lose that trust. If they lose that trust, they're over tomorrow. So there's a whole lot of talk in the media that, they're just pushing ads, etc. Their community actually understands that that's how they make money, so they actually don't have a problem with it. Years ago, when before it was all kind of legal to have hashtag gifted or hashtag ad, we worked really closely with the Advertising Standards Authority to help them create those guidelines that the advertising industry uses. So we're literally integral to how it's all ended out. Sorry or not sorry, depending on how you felt that those went. But it actually works really well, and I've never seen a problem with it.
They're smart business people. Like, they know what works for their community and what's going to piss them off. And also when you've got talent managers, so people of influence, we call her our influencer whisperer, Molly. She works with our talent to either say, look, this is great for you and your brand and your community, or it's not. And we love it when influencers turn us down, because it means that they're taking it seriously.
Are there examples of a particular influencer or brand that's doing something that you consider to be kind of path-breaking, or that represents where this is heading, and in terms of a campaign or an ongoing body of work?
I think we're going to see a lot more collaboration happening. We're starting to see little bits and pieces. Well, we see a lot of it internationally, and I think that'll start to flow through into Australasia a lot more. So actually proper collaborations.
Collaborations between different influencers and the brand, or the brand? Yes,
between the brands and the influencers. And that's just, in the States, it's very well recognised that the influencers are a brand in their own right. So for them to have, you look at Rihanna and I think it was Adidas or something, you've got these brand partnerships happening, and I think we'll see more and more of that happening here. Haven't seen a lot of it happening yet, but I feel like we're just on the cusp of it. That's my guess.
And in terms of the sort of changes to Instagram and Facebook's feeds and priorities, which often in response to TikTok, particularly over the past few years, how has that sort of impacted your business or the kind of influencers that you're working with?
You've just got to tell their story slightly differently. You've got to connect with your audience really, really quickly. That short form works really, really well. And it's also lo-fi that's trending at the moment. So that lo-fi, really authentic, genuine content. So not that high polished content that you would see on TV or your Instagram feed. So that is changing, and we've just got to be ahead of the game, and we've got to move fast. And that's why, as an agency, we've become known as that agency that can react and move fast with the trends that are happening. And Meta is just keeping up with TikTok, and they're doing a great job of it.
An interesting one on that is when you talk about lo-fi, which is a big trend at the moment, it's that real raw. As someone who has a 14 and 17-year-old daughters, it's pretty raw. It's hilarious. But when we look at Flying Tiger, which is the Chinese specialist marketing agency we bought last year, what's really interesting, if you look at the Chinese platforms like WeChat and Little Red Book, which is kind of like a combination of Pinterest and Instagram, it's very lo-fi, and it is almost ahead of the curve a little bit as well. So we sort of almost see what's happening in the Chinese space and kind of hits. I think gives us an advantage when it kind of hits the Western world as well.
And I think there is a place for that high value, beautiful content as well. And I know that our favourite campaign is the Gucci campaign with the train spotter, and that is another type of influencer, right? He is a train spotter. That's what he is. And Gucci just saw this amazing opportunity and collaborated with this guy, and just incredible, creative, unique way of getting the brand out there.
It's interesting you talked about the lo-fi aesthetic, which is undeniably true in that space, but brands and the agencies that wrap around them have spent decades basically telling them that they had to present, not always, but the vast majority of times, and with a particular kind of level of polish, as you described. Is there, how do you find that education process where you might have, even if it's well understood within parts of the marketing department, once it kind of echoes up to maybe people who aren't quite as close to the sort of the culture on the stuff, are they always comfortable with the way this thing sort of looks and feels?
No.
Well, tell me how that goes.
It's a journey.
I mean, it comes down to trust at the end of the day. So, we've been around forever. We've get fantastic results, and there is a lot of like, come on, you've got to be brave. We can pull it if we really have to, but I think you should try it. Or we like to use the word pilot a lot. But it is just a matter of, I think because now large brands overseas are doing it, it's helping the New Zealand, Australian brands step into it a bit more. But it is still, yes, it's not and the thing is we love polish as well. I think that helps because we both come from agency background. Like there's nothing more beautiful than a heart-rendering piece of content, whether it's, lo-fi or hi-fi.
And the great thing is that we can show the C-suite and board level the results. And that's what's going to get them to turn or to flip. To show them lo-fi quality content without the results, that's not going to get them.
That's not going to
It's not going to move them.
And also, it is a trend. I can see it flicking back again.
It is always a trend.
Yeah. Give it another year and it'll be back to completely filtered, over-the-top stuff again.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O-Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
And you were talking before about Flying Tiger.
Yes.
That sort of speaks to a whole demographic that quite often feels like it is excluded from the sort of marketing story in New Zealand. The demographer Paul Spoonley on this podcast a few weeks ago, speaking to just how fast-growing and sort of underappreciated the whole Pan-Asian diaspora is. How do you given that you have the opportunity within social to kind of speak to more easily to these different communities, how do you go about sort of identifying that, and do you consider that to be an advantage of your approach?
Oh, absolutely. Flying Tiger is fantastic because, we are talking there's 250,000 Chinese speakers in New Zealand, and they're not on Western social media, and they're not watching TV, and they're not listening to non-Chinese radio. So how else do you reach these people? And they do tend to be Auckland-based and sort of a higher socio. So a lot of our brands are really interested in talking to this segment of the community, and we can do that. We've got the largest, just like our social club, we've got the largest database of KOLs, which is the key opinion leaders, the same thing as influencers in the China community, and we work with them. We work with WeChat. We are the Australasian partner for WeChat. I was just got back from Sydney last night from meeting up with them and helping them out in Australia and New Zealand, and it just enables us to give our clients some some insight and actions that they can't get really through anyone else. But the cool thing is, because we've got Flying Tiger, yes, but we've also got Socialites and Social Club, we can kind of bring it all together in one big story for the brands, which I think is really nice for them. They're dealing with one person, but being able to work across every single channel and talk to all their demographics.
How do you find that more traditional agencies respond to you? Because often, we're well aware from the spin-off in Daylight that when you sort of brush up against, like it's hard to know where the line is in terms of, a lot of us have overlapping services. The fact that you come from, a very defiantly social-first approach where often, put politely, the big agency can feel very social last. Like, what do they... how has your reception been, particularly as you've started to broaden into these other related areas of the business?
Look, I think it's been really positive. We've always been at the table with these traditional agencies and at the big end of town, and I think the respect is there. And the funny thing is they do social media. So there's no difference between us being at the table with our clients and they already offer social media, but we are offering that social media to that particular client and that flipping over to traditional. This is not about stepping on any toes. It's just about seeing an opportunity and being able to offer that to our existing clients and growing it to clients who want to or consider social first and then broadening out to traditional. So at the moment, it's just been really, really positive across the board.
And, you're both women. This is a woman-owned agency in a world that is still kind of, rightly or wrongly, particularly characterised as a boys' club. How do you think that, or do you think that makes a difference in terms of how you operate and the opportunities you see in these spaces?
I do. Yeah, I do.
It's quite So I mean, there is a lot more women CEOs in the ad agency space at the moment. Like I look at Priya at DDB and Nikki at Spark Foundry. So it's nice it's not all men, which is great nowadays.
There's definitely been a wave towards more females.
Yeah.
And I think we put a different spin on leadership and also Adland as well. We all know that Adland is renowned for been egotistical
club.
and,
Yeah, it was a boys' club.
A little bit arrogant, and we bring a little bit of a different spin on that, which I think is needed in the industry.
And in terms of one of the things that you mentioned in the release announcing the new name was that part of this is that you're on the All of Government panel, in terms of having access to that. And, it's one thing to think about trying to convince a brand to embrace lo-fi and kind of get comfortable at the edge of the culture. It's quite another, again, thinking about the risk aversion and the stakeholders involved in government and government agencies. What is your experience of the parts of government's willingness to kind of play in this area? And do you think that they deploy social as well as they might?
They're getting really, really good at it. We've actually worked on a couple of campaigns where we've worked with influencers. That was with That's Us, or the That's Us campaign during COVID, and that was connecting with Māori rangatahi. And the content was like off the charts. We actually won quite a few awards for it because the government agency was just really, really brave. Yes, we did not get the vortex of long white through, but we got a vortex of water through, and that was content that really, really resonated with the audience that we were wanting to speak to. So they're actually getting really across it and supporting it.
Yeah, they've asked you down to talk to them a couple of times, haven't they, Mel?
Yeah.
Yeah, like specifically, like, this is cool, how do we get amongst it? Send down Mel.
And in terms of, mentioned it earlier, TikTok and its growth, we're still, it doesn't feel like the kind of advertising marketing participation in TikTok has matched the level of user growth there. Is that fair to say? And how do you sort of see that platform kind of growing and evolving?
It's a pretty serious platform. I'm not sure what the latest numbers are, but it is eating Meta's lunch, to be honest. From what I can see,
average of 1.5 hours spent on TikTok a day by the New Zealand population, and brands are really jumping on board. TikTok is definitely more immature in terms of so many things compared to Meta, but so mature in other ways. And they know that their audience wants to be entertained. They want to find joy, and that's why they go to TikTok. So that's where brands are headed.
Yeah, as a brand, the great thing about TikTok is it's really one single-minded focused. It is, as Mel said, entertain me, give me joy. That's it. Whereas if you look at the other platforms, there's a lot more nuance and depth you can go into. So it's almost a simple platform in some ways.
Do you see in sort of a different generation of or group of influencers succeeding there, or are people succeeding in porting across followings between the platforms?
A bit of both. There's definitely they're jumping around influencers, especially like professional influencers who've been around for, say, 5, I love this, like really old, 5 years. But also there's some really cool new ones coming through, which is really great. And we've got the spotting team out spotting for them.
So tell me about that spotting team and the talent ID front, and maybe even name a couple of people who you think are doing kind of really interesting things within that space or those communities.
So for us, our talent agency, People of Influence, we have influencers that have influence outside the internet. So they're either sports people or radio presenters, TV personalities. And that is really important to us because they have real influence with their communities, and that's our filter, I guess. And we keep our roster quite tight. And we do that for a reason, because we want to make sure that we're giving them the best service, but we're also not a spray and pray, kind of just get everyone on board. In terms of an influencer that's doing a great job.
I was telling Mel the other day, I think I rang her up, I think when I was in Sydney, I've got an idea. We should do like New Zealand's next top influencer campaign. Just be hilarious just to try and find one. Probably a really bad idea, but would be really fun to see who's out there.
But there must be someone who kind of stands out as feeling like they epitomise this era.
Is it Dr. Tick?
Oh, yes.
What's his name? Dr. Tick?
He's got Tourette's.
Yes, and he's really fun to work with. And I've been following him forever since at the time, I think, 12-year-old told me I need to follow this amazing Kiwi influencer. And he's this awesome content creator who has Tourette's in New Zealand. And he's just hilariously funny. He brings me joy. It's an example. It's just bizarre, but it's just awesome.
There are so many incredible influencers and ambassadors out there.
Maybe we should do a who's who list of our top 100 or something every year.
Idea.
Thanks, Duncan. We like that idea.
No, I agree. Because it can feel like, because you're right, these things are about communities, and in the world we left behind, the monoculture, everyone had at least a grazing visibility over what a quote-unquote celebrity was. Now someone can be an enormous star and have actually no proximity to someone who might be in someone else's pocket kind of full-time. And I guess that's the sort of, to me, that one of the key things that's changed over the last decade or so. When you see, is there still a kind of a premium for a sort of a monoculture type figure? And so I'm thinking about, probably more people of influence versus socialites, cast, like the kinds of people who can still, get on a breakfast or there's that layer that...
Like the Will Smith.
Yeah.
We all want you to be president and do action movies.
Yeah, what is the kind of, is there a premium there, or are brands increasingly agnostic? They don't have to necessarily have heard of the person. They can just see their following and trust that you have a guide on the impact that they can bring.
The funny thing is the follower numbers don't really, it's a vanity metric. It doesn't mean much. It's actually, who are they as a person? Do their values align? Are they creating the content that is right for the brand, but also will resonate with the audience? Do they get a premium? Yeah, sure. If they can connect with their audience and get that engagement because of who they are, of course they will get a premium, 100%. But funnily enough, it's some of the nanos and the up-and-coming, smaller influencers that get incredible engagement because they know their communities really, really well. So, and then you've got huge influencers that are not connecting with their audience. So I know it's not really answering your question, but it absolutely depends on who
No,
they
I think that's really interesting to me, because I heard that you sort of read that quite a lot, that there's the nano influencer, or sort of what might be seen as a subscale influencer, will have a much bigger proportional impact on their audience than someone who might have 10 or even 100 times the following, but it's kind of tumbleweeds because it just doesn't, it feels like it's coming from 1,000 miles up rather than happening around them. But again, do you... there are extra layers of complexity when you talked about the type of scrutiny that it's easier to scrutinize one person with 100,000 followers than it is 10 with 10,000, right? Surely you must have moments when things don't quite go according to plan, when you're sort of trying to build a more intense but distributed campaign amongst smaller influencers.
Yeah, for sure. It is way more difficult because you're going through the weeds and you're finding more people who can make more mistakes. And that, as I alluded to at the beginning, is that briefing and that contracting needs to be watertight. But yes, of course, sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes the content that they produce is just not on the mark, or it's just not singing. So we have to get them to reshoot or do the content. But that's about as far as we have got with anything that's gone wrong. We haven't had anything go terribly wrong. But when you are trying to find many influencers with fewer audiences, it is actually more difficult, for sure.
And lastly, I wrote something about the sort of rise of user-generated content and how it exists as this kind of alternate universe in a way to the Hollywood kind of entertainment complex, which is currently on strike. And I guess the thesis of the piece was like, you can have all the picket lines you want over here, but this world is growing at a pace. Like this time last year, Netflix was bigger than YouTube, according to Nielsen's new Gauge TV metrics. Now that's flipped again. And you can't imagine that with the pipe stopped on the Hollywood side that you won't see this world, that the sort of user-generated content world continue to grow, which creates, you would think, more opportunity for you. Looking ahead, sort of imagining, say, at the end of this decade, where do you see, Thompson Spencer in terms of its scale relative to those more traditionally oriented companies?
I think we've got a leading start for this new world. So hopefully we're ginormous and global takeover and as big as Netflix, obviously. It's the only way to answer that question, isn't it? Mel's like, oh gosh, Wendy.
Why not?
But I do think it's that's such a really interesting point, and I hadn't thought about it in that way, Duncan. That's really cool because, like, you're right, that's where it's coming up. If I look at my even my kids, and one of them especially is an exceptional content creator, and she could do anything she wants really, and she doesn't need to necessarily know the right people or be in the right country or have the right, expensive $1 million worth of tools. She can actually be this incredible artist, and it's kind of democratized the whole world in a way. Obviously there's the negative side as well, but in a positive way, that sort of movement is opening it up to a whole lot of people who wouldn't normally have a chance to tell their stories or live their dreams. So it's quite powerful. And I hope for Thompson Spencer that we get to be a small part of that and, find these amazing people and give them the springboard to do some great stuff. I think we've got some cool things in the wings, hopefully, to do that.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much to both of you for coming up. And yeah, it's such a fascinating, as someone who kind of comes from a legacy traditional media kind of a background in a way, even though we've been digital since day one, it can be quite confronting, but I don't think there's, you can just feel the force of it. It's that shift is baked in, and I wish you all the best of luck in building that bridge between between brands and the creators who want to work with them.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, Duncan.
Cool. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The spin-off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-off Podcast Network.